Hi, welcome to this unit, Building Safe Communities. In this unit, we will be devoting much of our time to family violence. Clearly, it affects people of all races, and I guess it's difficult to name a culture in the world where it is not found. From a learning perspective, in this unit, we'll be undertaking some critical reviews, examine a few theoretical explanations. In addition to this, we will also be concerned about its effects on children. The whole idea behind this unit is to prepare ourselves to undertake social work tasks. I must remind everyone that we will be dealing with pretty complex and sensitive issues in this unit. None of us condone violence in any form, and I think that is possibly the reason why we come into social work. This is a unit that might challenge some of us, but then it might also provide a well-meaning intervention space. We might possibly learn how to build courage and confidence in someone. I'm a male lecturer, but you shouldn't be expecting any bias from me when I address the issue of domestic violence. I believe we all need to closely review violence of any form at the intersections of gender, patriarchy, religion, and culture. We will begin these discussions from a heterosexual perspective, but then intimate partner violence has also entered the same-sex relationships. Closely related is also how the elderly and the frail-aged are treated within the families and also within the institutions. At some point of time, after watching the video, we might also like to read a little bit about our positionality, reflexivity, and standpoint in a context. Positionality, reflexivity, privilege, and stated knowledge and our perceptions are basically or intrinsically related. The profession of social work appears to have inbuilt capacity for self-reflective process. Our thoughts on our world and our knowledge and experience appear to influence our responses to our clients. I have actually enclosed an article with Leisha Townsend and myself called Preparing Social Workers for Empowerment, the Place of Positionality and its Continual Intricacies from one of my last books in 2015. And it's available in the creative domain. It's also available in the public domain, so you can always download that. One of the important things around this issue of domestic violence is, well, there are a number of people who have a reasonable understanding as to what it is. There are equally a number of others who have a limited understanding of what domestic violence is all about. There is this feeling that violence only affects women in Australia. Similarly, there is a feeling that domestic violence happens only to the poor people or uneducated people or women from certain cultures or men from certain cultures. There is plenty of research which shows that intimate partner violence is obviously biggest cause of injury, including death for women in Australia. Similarly, there is enough evidence which suggests that domestic violence affects everyone: class, culture, religion, sexual orientation, marital status, age. These intersections don't matter at all. There are perpetrators, there are abusers, and that's all that takes place.
There's also sometimes you hear some people deserve to be abused. In fact, she or he is responsible for the violence because they provoke it. Now, irrespective of what stand one takes, one thing that is very clear is no one deserves to be abused. The only person responsible for the abuse is the abuser. Abusers tend to blame the victim, obviously, for whatever behavior, for whatever action, and family often hear only their perspective. There isn't any other way that court within the family looks at it. And that's not really fair. The other way of looking at it is, if that person didn't like it, he or she could have left the situation. Is that easy? Aren't there any compulsions? Do they have options? Do they have enough money? Can they go out of the current accommodation? What happens to children? Not leaving does not necessarily mean that the situation is okay and that the situation can ever be condoned. That would be an absurd way of looking at violence. There are again several other myths, one of them being that most people commit violence if they are under effects of alcohol or drugs. Now, that is not a reason at all to abuse. It's quite possible that extreme violence can come out of situations of alcohol consumption or drugs because one's own judgment, thinking, capacity, all of that might just become dormant or vanish. So that is an important issue that needs to be considered, and that's also an area where we probably have a role to play. Some people think abusers may be mentally ill. There's a psychopathic tendency. Maybe there's a personality disorder. Now, I don't think the literature, particularly the clinical literature that emerges from psychiatric social work perspective, subscribes to this. Many are considered to be respectable members of the community. Violence can take place anyway. Abuse can take place anyway. What we would probably be thinking in terms of is how do we see a particular slant, a particular abuse, and what does that, how do we check with it, check in and check out as we call it. Stress and anger. Yes, you could be stressed with something or the other. And does it mean a work stress could lead to anger at home? Or should anger at home for some reason or stress at home lead to any kind of violence elsewhere? So these are some of the things that we need to probably think about and understand. And I think one of the things that seems to be happening is there are many myths that are passed on. I want you to read some of these things and see whether they ring bells. Have we at any point of time tacitly or otherwise agreed with this, accepted them, or heard about them? Do they ring bells? Take a moment and think about them. To think women are very manipulative. They'll tell those stories. Or the man saying, I couldn't help myself. Or man's home is his castle. Similarly, I only ring her to see if she's okay. That means I'm out of it. If I get angry enough, I'll blow up and become violent. And someone else says, well, he's got a short fuse. Hitting your partner has nothing to do with the kind of parent a man is. Such statements are found in many, many cultures. Certainly, when we consider TV, we are probably also considering at what intersections this happens. Culture is one. Ability of an individual to accept because of economic situation, because of children, because of not being in a position to get hold of a job. There could be various reasons why someone lives in a violent relationship. So we need to understand that. And that's one of the reasons what we need to be looking at. This is a short movie about domestic violence. It explains to us various facets of the violence that is seen by individuals. Could be emotional abuse, intimidation, physical and mental effects. We'll be looking at a couple of wheel diagrams developed in the United States, and they're called the Duluth Model. In the area of domestic violence, social workers in several countries use these models. In the center, at its core, is power and control. The center is surrounded by different sets of behaviors that an abusive partner uses in order to maintain this power and control. These sets of behaviors principally are coercion and threat. Relationship violence is seen as a mixture of a number of diverse strategies of abuse that are used to preserve power and control. The words power and control are in the center of the wheel. The center is bounded by different sets of behaviors, and the power is used to preserve control. Which touched upon a minute some of these behaviors: coercion and threat, intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming, sometimes using children, economic abuse, and obviously the male privilege. Many of these behaviors are expressed in rather subtle, normal, and almost unrecognizable forms. When you see them in this wheel closely, you tend to recognize them and the patterns associated with most of these behaviors can be displayed together. The purpose they achieve is the same way to enforce power within the relationship. It's a good idea in this diagram, and it's also a great idea to use this diagram in therapy sessions and along with the clients. This comes handy in our engaging conversations with social workers, colleagues, and even in training. Some of the other aspects of the wheel, when read in front of the client or pointed to them, or if they read it, the client may be able to recall many of those behaviors that occur in their relationship. Now let's look at the outer wheel or the outer ring. What does it represent? Physical and more visible violence. I'm aware in some situations you can actually see abusive acts that overtly are visible. These physical acts that are equally intense acts seem to be helpful in reinforcing the regular use of the subtle methods of abuse. So one sees abuse as a cycle. The wheel is a good, hardy tool that suggests how power and control are deployed. The wheel also serves another purpose. As a tool, when you have it in a colored fashion, it assures the client that she is not alone. The client possibly is experiencing a kind of a pattern. Other victims that you might have seen before have all gone through something that must be done about it. That is the way we start to set some things into action. Now this wheel can also be used from the perspective of explaining the difficulties and dangers of abusive relationships and what might have to be done to end those behaviors or leave those relationships. The next wheel under consideration is the equality wheel. It's a model used to explain the dynamics of a healthy relationship. It's applicable to all forms of relationships, with friends, with dating partners, with intimate partners, life partners, family members. Each component of the wheel supports and reinforces the other. The equality is in the center. It is also produced by the same agency which has produced the Duluth Model. The equality wheel describes the qualities involved in a healthy relationship. It shows the changes needed for men who batter to move from being abusive to a non-violent partnership. It's best used in conjunction with the power and control wheel. As I said, it explains the dynamics of a healthy relationship. And in the center of the wheel, we have equality, which is the foundation of a good, healthy relationship. The spokes of the wheel are interesting. Trust. We need to trust appropriately someone, life partner, or a new acquaintance. Support each other. Encourage each other's goals, activities, and work through personal growth. Respect each other's boundaries. Learn about other people's boundaries and do not fringe upon them. Responsibility. That's about shared responsibility. That's good for maintaining relationships. Both people in a relationship should be included in making decisions. Communication. That's a central element. Communicate effectively. Effective communication. Clearly expressing your thoughts and feelings and listening to those others that with whom we are concerned. Boundaries. Boundaries once again are very important, and they create safe, comfortable space to experience relationships. They define and communicate your boundaries within which you can move about. Honesty. Being open and honest. I think it's important for both people in a relationship to be honest about their intentions, feelings, desires. Accountability. That's again a fair call. Be responsible for your own actions. Talk to others. Understand how your actions affect others. Now in the outer circle, there are other things. Non-violence, for instance. There's no place for violent acts or behaviors. in healthy relationships. Example of violent acts and behaviors which we've already considered before: yelling, name calling, minimizing, throwing things, unwanted touching, pushing, hitting. All of that definitely are in that sort of a outer circle of the wheel. So basically, we go back and use these two wheels, one to as a diagnostic tool and the other certainly as the ideal tool, or basically a tool which will tell us what is it that we are missing and what is it that we need to promote in a relationship. Many people who experience domestic violence describe the abuse that they endured as happening in a cycle, meaning that there seems to be a pattern that occurs over a period of time. Developed by Dr. Lenore Walker in the United States in the year 1979, the cycle of violence illustrates the cyclical nature of abuse and helps to explain how the behavior of a person using domestic violence can change. Certainly, not all women experience a cycle of violence in the same way, and a cycle can take place in a day, in a week, or even exhibited over a few months. Some people may experience some stages of the cycle, and some may not see them at all. Now, how does that start? It starts with some sort of a tension building. Minor incidents take place. They could be physical, they could be emotional. Victim does feel the growing tension. There's some sort of uneasiness in the overall communication. Victim tries to control the situation to avoid violence. And it's a description. I think it's a very apt description when you say walking on eggshells. Victim cannot obviously control the abuser, and perhaps that becomes the longest phase. The cycle of violence, which is of course also described in many other ways, it consists of this sort of a tension building standover phase where control and fear seems to be the most dominant factors. Control by the abuser, fear by the victim. Now let's move on to explosion. How does that take place? That's when the tension escalates, abuse increases, and behaviors, often volatile and unpredictable, seem to increase. The perpetrator's behaviors obviously escalate. One might feel very frightened. One might feel that anything you do will only worsen the situation. And that's what we talked about, walking on eggshells. The explosion stage, in a way, is possibly the stage which marks the peak of violence or the violent episodes. Would there be a next stage? Yes, there would be. That is called the remorse phase. And how does that happen? That is a kind of a situation where probably minimizing the abuse or acting as if it did not happen at all starts coming up. It's a kind of a stage where you believe that, look, at the end of the day, there is still something between the two. There is a relationship. And there's also a possibility that there is some sort of a justification that comes up. Minimization takes place. Their guilt possibly is something that gets portrayed quite a lot. The perpetrator may feel ashamed or remorseful about what they have done. They may retreat from the relationship or attempt to justify those actions. The next phase is called the pursuit phase. In this stage, the perpetrators may promise that they'll never be violent again. They may become very, very attentive, making promises to change, to seek help, give some gifts, buy some ice cream, seek your commitment to the relationship and to them. They may try to rationalize their behavior, blame work or other stress, or offer to make changes or stop using drugs and alcohol. Not sure how long that could go on, but it is quite possible that is also a place and time where, if there is effective counseling that comes up, it's quite possible some things can be reversed. The next phrase, let's look at the next phrase, and that is clearly defined as a honeymoon phase. Both the victim and perpetrator in the relationship may now be in denial about the abuse and may have recommitted the relationship because all the things have kind of taken place. Communication has been established. Some sort of gifts and other things have been exchanged. Dates have been remembered. Maybe birthdays have been remembered. Maybe special colors and flowers and various other things must have been remembered. They're trying their best to put a little bit of romance back into their relationship. Now, how long would that last? How would that recommitment take place? What are the additional things and additional factors that would be required to see that it actually can be cemented and the relationship can carry on? These are very, very important during this phase. Certainly, both the abuser and the victim may choose not to consider the possibility that violence may occur again. We look forward for that, and that's the hope of social work. I think the intervention basically will be very, very important at this point of time, checking with them and ensuring that things are moving in a direction in which both are willing to make some adjustments, or maybe willing to carry on and see, but they need to monitor. So this may be an opportunity to think in terms of whether the cycle has ended, will end at all, will possibly begin. I mean, what are the gut feelings? What are the hunches? What has been the set pattern before? What has been the narrative that you heard from the victim? And what did you pick up from that? And what is the level of risk that one would be thinking in terms of taking in issues like this? I think this is all very, very important from that perspective, and the cycle of violence, which talks about the tension building, explosion, and the honeymoon phase, is an important contribution which Dr. Walker made a long time ago, but it is still very, very useful. If we find a victim in a domestic violence situation, we must also try and understand the decision to leave is often a difficult one for them. After living with domestic violence, one's self-esteem, self-confidence obviously gets affected. They tend to see themselves as possibly lower. It may take time to feel positive and hopeful, and also to think in terms of future. Now, that is not an easy thing, and it's not something that can easily be expected in those situations. Some people think it should be easy for a woman to leave
a relationship where domestic violence is happening on a daily basis. The truth is that it may be much harder to leave an abusive relationship than a non-abusive one. Some women may choose not to leave the relationship because there are various other considerations: children, lack of safety elsewhere, and possibly a kind of an entrenched situation. Women may leave and return a number of times before they are able to leave permanently. It is also important to realize that leaving does not always mean that an individual has become safe. So we need to go over all these considerations when we are sitting in a sort of a counseling or a social work mode. In fact, there may be greater dangers from the partner's or ex-partner's abuse at the time of separation itself. Any attempt, obviously, to leave requires planning, safety of the children, and obviously we also need to take into consideration what happens to the immediate needs of the children, the schooling, and various other things that come about, including the family's economy. It's important to remember that the challenges may seem overwhelming. Many women have been able to leave certainly abusive relationships to go on to have more safe, more healthy, and certainly fulfilling lives for themselves. But during the process of doing so, they have obviously seen more harassment, more intimidation, undermining the ability to parent, and discrediting that could even take place as far as a mother. Certainly withholding of financial supports, endangering children, and distributing the relationships in front of children or during access. All these things are basically things that one has to think about and certainly, obviously, be prepared to work with strategies to prevent some of these things to happen. And this can only happen if there are interventions which build up the self-esteem and self-confidence and some sort of a positivity as far as future is concerned. It's important to do some discussion on safety planning with our clients, and it's also important for us to assist them in case they haven't thought about it. For us to understand what a safety plan can be, it's worthwhile to look at the internet, particularly to put words like safety planning, domestic violence, and there are many plans that you might actually come across, and it's good to get ourselves familiar with. For instance, it's worthwhile to ask our clients as to whether they have already thought about whom they need to inform: immediate family, friends. Have they made transport plans? Have they asked a friend to actually help them out to move? Or have they booked a taxi? Has the GP been informed? Is there any evidence of injuries? Have they picked up a few personal papers and items that they need? Birth certificates of children, maybe marriage certificate. If there's already a domestic violence protection order in place, if there's a family court order, if it is in place, and people who might have passports, children's passports, driver's license, if there are any other things like insurances, policies, taxation, employment issues, all those things. There's a plenty of list that cuts across all kinds of economic classes, the lower income classes, middle income, and even those who are in higher income. Because domestic violence, once its effects, it doesn't choose anyone in particular. It's emotional abuse, it's physical abuse. It can happen in any situations. School records of children, the Medicare card, the numbers, bank cards, credit cards, simple medication for children, simple medication for own for the person, the victim, any other things, including even a pair of house keys just in case you need to come back to the house to pick up a few things. Keeping stack of small amount of cash somewhere for emergency. All these things become important. Informing the children's school, arranging for the mail to be redirected, considering some banking and postal arrangements, making sure that there is a little more security in case you decide to stay in the house itself, and extra safety in terms of car parking, changing the locks, contacting the Centrelink. Various other things can come about because there are instances where ex-partner breaches require additional protection orders. Police reporting might have to occur. Telling the neighbors also might have to occur. So please have a look at some of these details, which are very much available on the internet, and those resources might be useful to you. Thank you. As domestic violence affects all societies, and in fact all countries, everywhere there are a number of resources, and one of the most important things that we have learned and are in a position to use, there seems to be plenty of resources on the internet itself. But even within the white pages and telephone books that we have, or otherwise, even within Australia, very clearly in every state and every city, we've got women's support services, men's domestic violence clinic, children's services, emergency services, legal advice, and there will be plenty of these names and plenty of the agencies which are available. In addition to that, when it comes down to the communities, the immigrant communities, we will have multicultural services, possibly immigrant women support services. Certainly translation and interpreting services can be utilized to understand what exactly is happening with them. And there are then when it comes to indigenous people, we've got Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander services, police, of course, both the federal police as well as the state police stations will be able to tell us something straight away. The courthouses are also important for us to know. Then we have got correctional services, and of course we also have in every state a sort of a service housing commission, or what we would call the public housing, including including shelters for temporary purposes. There are a number of websites, and there are domestic and family violence research centers, the nonviolence.com.au. Then we've got the Australian National Research Organisation for Women's Safety, which is again www.androse.org.au. The Family Court of Australia, which we can look it up as www.familycourt.gov.au. And then of course there are various other kids helplines, the Commission for Children and Young People, and there are also a few other Australian resources. I think the biggest amongst them is the Australian Domestic and Family Violence Clearinghouse that we have clearly given here, and also the Australian National Research Organisation for Women's Safety to reduce violence against women and their children. And don't forget to go to the Duluth Model, which is about the social change to end violence against women, from where I have taken much of my presentation for the day, and much of the presentation, the resources are very much there. And certainly, although all of these resources are American based, they have been acknowledged, and we are very grateful that a wonderful model has been developed which can be I won't use the word transplanted, but can easily fit into in transcultural contexts, and we can always make a few modifications here and there and utilize that. So if you actually Google further down under the Duluth model, you might even find a few more things which I haven't found. Let's hope this first lecture of mine has been useful to all of you. Please give me some feedback and let me know how we are going and how I am going with this particular unit. Thank you very much.